Welcome to our Digital Service Forum bi-weekly call. Today, we're going to have a bunch of people that are out in the field working on connected devices and talk about some challenges and solutions. And what's really cool is we're going to start to dive down into industry-specific challenges. So I'm looking forward to learning a lot about this myself. It's an area that I don't get to see a lot. Before we start, we always did a little bit of level setting just with what the group is, because a lot of times, depending on the topic, people might be here for the first time. So if you are here for the first time, if you could drop your name in chat and just tell us where you're from. The group, the URL at the bottom here is a link. We tried to put everything for the group in one spot. At one point, we were getting all over the place. So right now we have this one page that lists all the resources for the group. There's that Zoom registration that most of you found because you're here today. There's going to be a forum homepage. And this way, if our presenters, like the presenters today, want to share some of the content that they presented, they can put that on the forum. And this way, the video will be there and the information that was. So it could be a little bit of code or presentation or maybe even a white paper. Our YouTube channel holds all these recordings. So you can always go back, even go back, I think, up to a year and see all of our bi-weekly calls for the last year. And then the last one is there's a shared instance out there. It's a little beat up right now, I'll be honest with you, but we share a lot of configurations on there because a lot of times people don't want to be sending around update sets. So they'll just set their demo up on that shared instance and say, look, if you want it, just go there and see what we did. So if you send me a request, I'll give you an admin login to that shared instance. And I do a lot of my demos off there when I present. So this way you could see the configuration firsthand as an administrator and decide whether you want to pull some of it or all of it over into your instance. So I'm going to post this in the, just so you have it, I'm going to post this in the comments. And that'll give you a hook into everything. So you can go to that one page. We created this group at the beginning because a lot of my customers were confused about the common service data model and CMDB, kind of the core of service delivery. And what we realized that a lot of people needed this data and needed this configuration or the meta model, right, to do their digital transformations. So our mission changed a little bit. Instead of just CMDB stuff, which it was when we had our first 2 members back in 2018, it's become more about enabling people to drive digital transformations, which is really inevitably what they were trying to do when they were looking at all the CMDB stuff. So we try to share as much of the customer work and as much as the ServiceNow information as we can with you, so that it's, again, out on that community mostly is where you'll get that. Our whole team, the enterprise architecture team, that's the team that I'm on. Our team is the one who hosts these meetings. So we're out trying to get our customers to speak with us and come in so that we can have real useful content for you. And the main way that you get information here is going to be this bi-weekly call. As long as you're on the bi-weekly call, you'll get most of what we're doing. We might do like a sidebar thing, like a little workshop or something from time to time. But if you come to these bi-weekly calls, it's going to be the bulk of it. And it goes from really business level stuff to really down in the weeds CMDB stuff. So just make sure you take a look at the content each week when I post it out there. You know, like that one's for me or that one's not for me. So today what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about the problems around connected devices. We have some specialists on from our healthcare, some specialists on from our utilities and manufacturing, and then some of our product team on here to help you talk about what the solutions are that are available today. So for all of our content today, I'm going to hand it over to Surjit. He's going to kick us off. I think you can just take share away, Surjit.
Yeah. Everybody okay to hear me okay? Yeah.
Yes, sounds good.
Okay, let me go full screen. I'm sharing okay as well. Yep.
It looks great.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody, and afternoon, evening, for wherever you are. Let me start by just doing a little bit of an introduction. We have 3 speakers today. And I apologize, I should have put all the names on this slide, but my name is Surjit Ahluwalia. I'm part of our enterprise architecture team. I work alongside with John and others here at ServiceNow. And I've been at ServiceNow for a little over a year, have been working in the healthcare space, supporting healthcare customers, actually globally, for over a decade. We also have Jasmine Rogers and Robert Rash, who are going to partner with me and talk a little bit about, connected, and we're going to focus on OT devices. Let me give them the floor just for a minute to introduce themselves. Jasmine?
Yeah, hi everyone. Jasmine Hodges. I am the Senior Outbound Product Manager for all things healthcare and life sciences in the industry product that we've built revolving the vertical. So really nice to meet everybody today and look forward to discussing clinical device management.
Robert?
Good morning, folks. Robert Rash. I'm the Outbound Product Manager for OTM, the Operational Technology Management Solutions here at ServiceNow. Been here about 3 years at ServiceNow. I've been working in the manufacturing space and the plant floor for probably about the 25. I'm very excited to talk to everyone today about the solutions that we have around operational technologies. Appreciate it.
Wonderful. Great. So just to expand on the agenda a little bit before we dive in, like I said, we're going to focus a little bit on OT devices. I'm going to spend a little time just talking about the challenges, especially if you think about it from an enterprise perspective. I'm going to do a little bit of a deeper dive around workflows, talk about the cyber challenges in addition to just the break fix, maintenance, and support. And then Jasmine is going to talk to you a little bit about what are we doing and our solutions in the healthcare space. And then at the tail end, we'll have Robert talk to you about, what and how are we doing this in the manufacturing space, utilities, and hopefully you'll see that we are all, the challenges are pretty similar as well as, the solutions are pretty similar as well. Okay, somebody's trying to call me right in the middle of this. Okay, so let's dive into the healthcare space a little bit. And, I authored this slide a few years ago now. I think everybody would agree healthcare has been at an inflection point, in health, in terms of challenges and digital transformation for some time now. Costs of healthcare, especially in the US, exceeding $4 trillion, and that is unsustainable. I put this slide together basically saying, if you're a healthcare system, you really need to be thinking about digital transformation. If not, there's acquisitions, mergers, other types of, things that may not be desired that might happen. I'll share a recent example. We were talking to a health system and I was talking to them and they were like, we're literally losing, and this is this year, right? $1 million a day, right? Their challenges are how do we reduce cost? And this is a medium-sized healthcare system, right? A little over a dozen hospitals. They've got challenges around how do we reduce $150 million in costs, relatively quickly. We're talking 6 months, a year, if not sooner. And at the same time, they're looking at how do we double ourselves in 4 years? How do we improve our caregiver experiences? Reduce the turnovers happening. How do we improve patient outcomes, patient experiences? They're transitioning to value-based care because a lot of the reimbursements are happening that way. And you really take a look at, the old paradigm, new paradigm. There's new service entrants. Security starts becoming interesting, especially as everything becomes digital. You have, essentially first mover innovator advances. Dare I say, in the new paradigm now, we have ChatGPT, right? We all have to think about, especially from a healthcare standpoint, and I definitely need to get that one in there. Okay, so since we're talking about OT devices, I want to take a little bit for a second into, okay, so let's talk a little bit about the specific challenges in the provider space. We talked about cost, which trumps pretty much everything these days, right? But what are some of those next layers that providers are focused on? Securing data devices, it's no longer an IT problem. We've got OT devices now connecting to the network. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute here. Experiences remain top of mind, right? Caregiver experiences, care team experiences, and of course, the healthcare system is now changing where the patient is at the center of everything, right? Or the individual, and how do you really improve their experiences? Regulatory challenges have only continued to increase, and primarily because they're also trying to figure out what is this new digital world, and how does that change the landscape of what compliance is, and how do we keep people safe, right? And that's a big focus. On the right-hand side, some business initiatives, right? How do you move to anytime, anywhere care? These are, top of mind for the business leaders. I talked about value-based care, bundle payments, the entire landscape of fee-for-service. You go in, you take some services for healthcare, you pay for it. That is changing. That mindset is changing to how do I, number one, prevent you from getting to a hospital in the first place, but more importantly, keeping you healthy and improving the quality measures, which then result in more money. And I might just say, reducing inefficiency, everything in healthcare at the end of the day is about a workflow, right? In different places, different departments. We're going to talk a little bit about the challenges for OT workflows, security workflows, maintenance workflows today, and some of our solutions. So let me keep going. So a little bit more of a deeper dive. So let's talk about connected medical devices, right? And we'll talk about other types of connected devices as we talk about the other verticals. Why is this trend increasing, right? So a lot of us are familiar with, Affordable Care Act, if you've been in the healthcare space, also known as Obamacare, right? That around 2010 timeframe. Everybody was, okay, we got to deploy EMRs, meaningful use stage 1, get everything digital. Less than 20% of healthcare systems had any kind of EMR, right? Just a decade ago. Today, more than 90% of them are going to say, hey, we have an EMR deployed. But, I think the struggle has been, okay, now we got it deployed, now what, right? How do we bring value out of it? How do we use it for basic decision support, alarms, meds, workflow? How do we take it even further into clinical and interoperability, advanced decision support, really helping leverage the digital technologies to be able to deliver care? And when you start peeling the onion, what's really needed is not just the health record that needed to be digitized, but all the OT devices, your X-ray machines, your lab results, all the devices that have all that rich data. How do you tie it with that health record? And you bring all that together before the 7-minute, 8-minute encounter a physician has with a patient. And the medical staff is almost demanding, right? They need these devices connected. They need that data connected. And you can see an approximate 5-year growth on a chart that I put. I think this is from Markets and Markets, around just how much each of these devices just continue to grow, the connected devices. And then we'll talk a little bit about what does that really mean, in terms of workflow challenges, in terms of cyber challenges. Just going to build this slide out. You connect these OT devices and then you're like, okay, so, what new things do we have to worry about, right, with these devices? We know about the complexity. There's a multi-vendor environment out there when it comes to medical devices, and there's workflow challenges, right? So there's that complexity. You have this whole idea around IT skills. Once you start connecting these devices to the network, they are just like computers, right? Servers, desktops, mobile devices, all those wonderful, risks, challenges, opportunities, benefits, they all start becoming real when these devices start connecting. And the interesting thing is, historically, the clinical engineering teams in hospitals have focused on, they know how to fix circuit boards, maybe even fix a broken handle for a CT scanning machine. but they're not really comfortable with what is this IT and what is this network, right? And the IT organizations are exactly the reverse, right? They're always guarded against, okay, well, this is FDA regulated. We better be really, really careful. We're comfortable with switches and routers and computers. So there's that reverse skill set, gap. And then you have challenges of, we have old systems, old machines. I don't know how to patch them because the operating system is too old, right? Microsoft won't support it, or Linux doesn't have support for an old implementation. What do you do, right? These are millions of dollars. And I'm going to talk a little bit about security and security challenges. It's safe to at least mention here, some of these, ransomware attacks and challenges. In fact, I think the next one is really financial challenges. They can wipe you out, right? We've had healthcare systems that, have had over $100 million impact. One ransomware attack, it not only creates financial challenges, but also it has a brand challenge, and all the other risks that come along with it. You can see some of these numbers are huge, right? Sometimes these devices are mobile and they're connected and they disappear or people are searching for them. Might I say, nurses and sometimes care teams like to hold on to these devices, because they need it for their patients. And that creates an interesting challenge for healthcare systems. The FDA is obviously, continues to try to get ahead of this and say, net new devices, you got to make sure you have a security plan or you're not getting the approvals in class 1, class 2, class 3 devices. So big financial implications. I have a couple more slides. I'm going to dive a little bit deeper around how a healthcare organization deals with this or the challenge they have on a day-to-day basis. And then I'm going to hand it over to Jasmine here to talk a little bit about our approach, our solution, how are we thinking about this and solving for it at an enterprise level, right? That's what you expect from ServiceNow, and that's the approach we're taking. So this slide talks about, step one, in the OT space, in hospitals, first order of business, you need to get a good inventory of all your devices. And you've got a number of solid solutions here. Many of us have heard of Medigate, Order, Armis. They do a pretty good job now of detecting and really collecting the inventory of all the devices, especially the connected ones. And once you have a good handle on that, then you're like, okay, I got to do multiple things with it. Number one, I got to do break fix, support, maintenance. And this is historically what clinical engineering teams have done, right? Now they've got to worry about this added nuance of security, especially since the devices are connected. And then you're trying to figure out, okay, what does that security challenge mean? How do I create patching for the devices where I can apply a security patch? And I'll show you a conceptual workflow in the next slide, what that means. If I cannot patch, that's where step 2 comes in. I got to work with my IT team. I got to put some networking compensating controls, put some firewalls, maybe some access controls, segmentation, micro segmentation, because these devices at the end of the day do need to send data between the device and the health record. You just want to prevent anything, bad things like bad URL or access or telnet or FTP, which is not something that a CT scanner should be doing, right? So you've got to block those things. And then, the challenge goes beyond just security. It's around trust. A lot of healthcare systems will tell you they're worried about, patient safety, with so many, literally over 1,000 pumps in a hospital, trying to make sure that, the injection of medicine is not tampered with, and how do you create trust and integrity? Those are some of the things healthcare organizations are dealing with. One last slide to set the stage here for OT and the challenges. And this one is a little bit of a conceptual workflow, cyber management, right? You get an abnormal flow or an alert or an alarm from your security operations center. And you're like, okay, what does that mean? You know, for my OT devices, do I have a vulnerability? If I do, I need to go check with the OEM, and I have literally hundreds of OEMs, right, in my hospital. And there may be a multitude of systems that might have vulnerabilities. Then if I get a notice from them saying, you know, here's a patch, it's validated, you need to deploy it. If it's a day zero vulnerability, you know, you have urgency to it. How do you create workflows around getting it deployed, syncing it up with support and maintenance? And then if it's in, you know, there are legacy devices involved, what does that mean? Get IT involved, build, you know, network solutions to protect the devices. While all of this is happening, you got to make sure you're complying with HIPAA, you're, you know, managing audit challenges. So, I mean, this stuff gets complicated quite fast, right? And I might add, there's a lot of disruption because at the end of the day, the hospitals have to care for patients while they're doing all this. So I think I set up the challenge pretty good. Now the question really becomes, what are we doing about it, and how are we planning to support our customers through this journey? I'm going to invite you, Jasmine, to take it from here.
Absolutely. So taking a look at, you know, with all of that being said, what are we actually solutioning around this need for medical device management? Well, if you're familiar with ServiceNow, you know that since our inception, we've been doing IT asset management, true end-to-end asset management. And so what we're doing now in that context is we're taking everything that our customers know and love, everything we've been doing for quite a long time, and we're verticalizing it and we're applying it to this specific problem and this specific solution here. So everything from, you know, in a clinical engineering setting, being able to procure devices, being able to receive them, bring them on board, deploy that asset in the field appropriately, configured against, you know, the specific instructions or needs revolving that device and the clinical setting it's residing in. And of course, making sure that within that, we're maintaining and managing the compliance and security, and also any type of vulnerability response that we need to be making. Making sure that throughout that process, everything is also auditable and compliant, and we're able to identify and manage any you know, risks associated throughout that process. We also want to make sure that there's a heavy focus as well on handling all of the servicing of that device. So not only just the typical, you know, corrective maintenance that might be occurring in an actual hospital setting, but even extending to the devices that are extremely mobile or are more remote because they reside in a sort of care at home setting. So making sure that, you know, not just from a repair perspective, but also from an ongoing maintenance, servicing perspective, managing recalls, as those, you know, pose a lot of vulnerability and risk to both the organization and to, you know, ultimately the patients that are being that are interacting with these devices or, you know, utilizing these devices as a part of the services that they're receiving. And then, of course, all the way to the decommissioning. So making sure that we are following the appropriate steps, and of course, still maintaining compliance in terms of how we're disposing those properly and securely. Making sure that we're taking into account any of the environmental impacts that you know, may be associated where that device could be potentially refurbished. And so ultimately, all that being said, with that end-to-end medical device management, making sure that we're able to not only just optimize the device operation, but also reduce the total cost of ownership, those costly trends that we just went through, and ensuring that these devices are at their maximum availability for patients in both the explicit care settings, but also, of course, at home. So looking into the specifics of how that's informing our strategy here. So ultimately, we want to drive back to these three pillars here. So of course, we want to make sure that we're providing value in terms of efficiency, making sure you're able to stay compliant, not just, of course, within the organization, but especially with those you know, industry entities that you know, require certain levels of compliance in different areas. And then ultimately making sure that, you know, we're driving higher patient engagement, because our clinicians are able to not spend time looking for chasing down devices, but having everything appropriately available to them in service and maintained on a consistent basis. So really these 5 pillars that we're looking at, built on top of our Now platform, are the 5 areas that we're looking to provide this type of value in and really drive back to those 3 pillars here. And then in addition to that strategy, this is really all of the different areas that we're taking into account. These are questions that, or responses that are coming from both our customers and from the market based off of these trends that we've gone through that are informing the strategy. So this can be everything from, a visibility perspective, just knowing what devices do we actually have? What do we know about this? What do we have historically? Making sure we can truly provide that end-to-end out-of-the-box solution with ServiceNow in terms of that clinical device management. From a security and vulnerability perspective, making sure that our devices are secure from any threats, and we're compliant as well with any of those security requirements that we have to abide by as well. And then from a maintenance perspective, both making sure that we can maintain our preventative maintenance schedules, as well as also take into account the nuances and the consistency necessary for the alternative equipment maintenance procedures. Of course, from a regulatory compliance, being able to understand and meet the industry-specific regulatory requirements that revolve around these devices. And then, of course, from a performance optimization, making sure that our devices are in service and at their optimal performance and optimal utilization as well in terms of those devices. And then lastly, of course, just making sure from a servicing perspective that we have the ability to document and audit all of our repair checklists, that we're following all of our standard either organizationally defined procedures or manufacturer defined procedures as we're servicing these assets in and out of service.
Yeah, just a quick comment I might add, Jasmine, think about enterprise challenges, consistency across IT and OT, because, a lot of these things we've been doing in the IT space and now extending it to OT really helps make things a lot more efficient from an enterprise standpoint. So just wanted to add that plug.
And then we take a look at what the ecosystem looks for this solution, right? So we're leveraging integrations for device discovery with different medical device specific discovery tools. So we have different partners like Medigate, Forescout, Tenable, Armis that we're utilizing via what we refer to as our service graph connectors to be able to connect those back into the platform and not only, of course, know what devices we have and model out the associated details, but also tie those directly back into any necessary device workflows that are also, of course, informed by additional integrations. So we have the ability to integrate with ECRI for sort of that data normalization. We have recall management that we can integrate to as well in that context. And then, of course, making sure that we're able to manage the different parts ordering or part modeling via integrations with part sourcing manufacturers as well. And then, of course, for those non-connected devices, which are also very important to know, what we have, where we have it, and still continue to keep track and also tie it back to these main device workflows that we have. We have the ability to, of course, intake any sort of manual tracking that may be sort of current process for these devices, as well as RFID tagging and scanning to be able to still maintain an appropriate outlook on what we have in terms of those non-connected devices as well. And so ultimately, all of that being said, this is what's informing our overall ServiceNow solution here. So really, this is the full stack of everything we have to offer. So all of our core platform capabilities that, as a customer, you may be utilizing currently. And then, of course, layering that on top of the standard IT workflows and the IT asset management aspect that we've verticalized and evolved into enterprise asset management and that IOMT SecOps capability that is industry specific here. And then, of course, from a servicing and customer perspective, we want to make sure that we've layered that on top of customer workflows. So now we have our healthcare CMMS offering where not only are you able to service, maintain, and manage those clinical devices, but also make sure that you're maintaining all of the associated service management details necessary as a part of that process. So with that, I will turn it over to Robert.
Thank you, ma'am. We'll have a conversation around manufacturing. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to take a quick pause. John, were there any healthcare specific questions we wanted to address before we jump in, or just keep going?
No, just keep going. There's nothing in chat right now.
Okay, back to you, Robert.
Oh, thank you, sir. Appreciate it. So I want to talk a little bit more about going down that manufacturing or industrial space, right? And where we see those OT devices there, as well as utilities, because they are very similar paths in terms of requirements and what they're looking for from a visibility standpoint, right? But just talk about why we're seeing that uptick in the activity there from that side of the organization, right? One thing to notice, right, you'll see first, right, in 2019, we were the 8th most attacked industry, right, from a cybersecurity perspective. And recently we got the honor to move up to first in the list, right, in terms of, basically the main target for cybersecurity attacks, right? So obviously there's an increased lens on, and we see it in the news, right, and in the media around, some of the increased attacks in that landscape, and the threat profile that exists within, that manufacturing and industrial space. Why it's important, right? I think, both, Surjit and Jasmine covered this, right? When we start thinking about downtime, just from a security remediation standpoint, we often hear that, a ransomware event can take, a couple of weeks to fully recover from, right? If you combine that with the idea that, we have a metric there between $250,000 $700,000 is the average cost of an hour of downtime, equate that to a couple of weeks. And then if you take in consideration, if they don't have those proper policies in place of security incident remediation, right? Meaning, within the operational environment, whether it's utilities or manufacturing, right? If you don't go through that process of safely shutting down equipment, right? Making sure that the area is safe and doing all those operational tasks and playbooks that we can pitch in on, right? That obviously adds to that amount of downtime, right? This is just average downtime of just recovering from the security incident itself. But if you think about, there's repair cost and that sort of thing that gets incurred along with that one, right? That cost can be exponential. So 60% of those heavy industries, reported a breach, right? Obviously, we know that there's, unreported breaches back in 2019, but obviously that number is gaining traction every day. If we look at the same lens from a utility standpoint, Surjit, if you go to the next slide there, utilities, we're 4th in the industry for the most attacked industry, right? Again, those folks are starting to realize that the utilities landscape is a very good, lucrative area to start those attacks in. And they said, 53% at least had one or more of those breaches, right? Which is fairly concerning from utility and critical infrastructure perspective. But I think what's more concerning is 52, almost half of those could have been prevented, right? These are just, simple patches that left them open to those attacks, right? Just a simple process within their facility or within their organization could prevent those attacks. Surjit, let's move on to the next one, please.
Hey, Robert.
Yes, sir.
There's a question here. Does this device discovery involve ServiceNow ITOM discovery visibility, or is it external tools?
I love it. And John, the most ServiceNow answer I could give is yes. Because we, I have an architecture slide that speaks a little bit to that. But, the OT environment, right? Any OT environment is obviously very sensitive to active base scans, like our ITOM discovery or a SolarWinds or things like that. These are very, I guess, segmented and, they're proprietary networks, right? Proprietary protocols. And a typical active base discovery just doesn't work within OT, right? And speaking from experience, they can break OT networks. And so we take a very hands-off approach from that active discovery piece within the OT environment. So just like, on the medical device side, with partners like Armis, ForceCount, Medigate, I have a little bit more extensive list of the partners on my architecture slide. But we do leverage those technologies because those folks are obviously experts within, they know the difference between a device net and a Profinet network and that sort of thing. And they can obviously identify those assets. What they can't do in the same regard, and this is kind of speaking to my yes answer, is they can't, being a passive scan, just looking at passive network traffic, right? They're not being very intrusive to those devices at all. But they're not able to gain a lot of details when it comes to like server-based components or workstations, laptops, and that sort of thing. They're not able to tell you what your CPU is or your amount of RAM. So it's a very common motion that we have with customers when they're doing a deployment strategy, an architecture strategy, is to leverage that passive discovery from one of those vendors, but they'll also leverage like an ACC or another agent-based deployment within those components to lean in a little bit more on those details, right? When they're looking for, installed software, those sort of things that a passive scanner couldn't accomplish. So we very much play in both of those spaces, and we leverage obviously the reconciliation capabilities of ServiceNow to do that for us.
Well, I hope that answered your question, Michael. I had one more just to piggyback on that. So have you set up any of these use cases where like we were working on Department of Transportation and we had a control board in a streetlight control, but this is a state government, right? So there's tens of thousands of streetlight controller boards in all these poles. And we were talking about the idea of a transient asset. So it comes into ServiceNow when you need to do work on something or fix something, but then it goes out of ServiceNow when you're done. Have you guys broached on that topic at all?
Oh, 100% all the time. And that's a very common motion within OT, especially within industrial utility space. There's a lot of these assets, from an OT perspective, they'll only talk when needed. They don't generate random traffic because, just they want to broadcast a message, right? They only talk, again, when there's a command sent to them or they need to execute something. So that's very common that we run into that. And, it's a fantastic segue to this slide, that disconnected systems and data. That's one of the challenges, one of the barriers, we talk about utility, energy and critical infrastructure, but with any OT environment or industrial environment, right, it's not just a simple, challenge of the visibility in and of itself and being able to realize that you have that asset on your network, but also the context of that asset and what it actually drives and runs and what it operates and what its dependencies are and that sort of thing. Hopefully that answered that question. It was a great segue as well.
Yeah, thank you. That was good.
No, appreciate it. Appreciate it. So this is kind of a roadmap, if you will, and what we want to address when we talk about that industrial landscape, whether it be manufacturing or utilities or critical infrastructure mining, right? If they have those OT assets that exist within that space, right? We start again at that visibility level, right? And when we say visibility and inventory of those OT assets, again, it's more than just providing the customer with a list of things that exist within their space, but it's also that context around it. Again, we need to know what those devices run. Are they part of personnel or equipment safety, right? Critical production, critical data, that sort of thing. Because once we start addressing these other use cases within the landscape around security, incident change, that sort of thing, right? The folks that are carrying out these remediations, these playbooks, need that context, right? They need to know the business impact of what they're about to do. From a visibility standpoint, is this going to cost me a few $100s of downtime, or is it going to cost me a few $1 million of downtime? And it obviously helps them prioritize and work through some of those workflows and obviously assign that work accordingly. Incident change is something that's coming up a lot, especially on the compliance and regulatory side of the house, right? They're wanting to have not only have visibility into that incident change and patch management process, but obviously those gates at every step of the way and being able to log that information. Very common in utility space where they have to report up each step of that incident and change process to those regulatory bodies. Then we're going to start addressing health, right? When we say health, we're familiar with CMDB health, OT or IT asset health. Do the same thing on the OT side as well. So think about things like, my motor isn't running properly, or my belt just broke, or my transformer is performing the way it should, right? So applying those same ITIL processes that we've taken advantage of in the IT side of the house, but applying those to the OT side of the house, bringing in that context again, what else is this transformer dependent on? What else do I need to shut down? What else do I need to prioritize or schedule a maintenance window for? But applying those same processes, right? And it's very important to kind of take on that realization that we, when we're engaging with customers, right, that already have a good ITIL process or a visibility policy or a security policy or that sort of thing, when they start addressing that OT landscape, they're not starting from scratch, right? They're not, it's not that 800-pound gorilla that they believe it to be, because we already have those policies and procedures and things that customers have built up on the IT side of the organization. Really, the only thing that's preventing the roadblock is preventing them to do those same playbooks and those remediation steps on the OT side is just that operational context. So that's what we're building towards, give them that context so they can repeat some of those fantastic processes that they built on the IT side of the organization. Then we go on more to, we like to call it the digital factory, right? Or the digital worker, if you will, right? So inspections, checklists, cleaning procedures, things like that, that are either, are, again, if we think about just the OT landscape, typically these are spaces that are, we're just now realizing cloud technology and IoT and that sort of thing. So we like to say we're at least 10 years behind the technology curve compared to IT side of the business, right? So a lot of these checklist procedures and policies and SOPs and that sort of thing. These are clipboards. They're physical whiteboards on at the front of the line or that sort of thing, right? Or they exist in someone's head on the maintenance side of the house. So taking those same policies, providing those digitization to it in a mobile interface, and of course, asset lifecycle. That is a common use case that we're seeing within OT as well. Managing that front to back lifecycle of that OT asset, especially some of the capital expenditure pieces of equipment.
Hey, Robert, before you leave this slide, with the passive discovery, how do you find the patch level? How do you determine the patch level of each device? That's from Andreas, that question.
And the tough answer is it really depends on the manufacturer of the device itself and the technology that's actually doing the scanning. They're not all created equal, a lot of those security partners, but they are able to detect some details, some better than others. Some of them are configuration based, some of them are passive scan based, but they do lean in on that. Now, a lot of them can't detect what the patch level is, but they can detect that there was a change in password, change in a firmware revision and that sort of thing. But from a patch detection or a vulnerability detection standpoint, the same integrations that we have with those security partners that give us information around the device itself also give us information around the vulnerability. And that's one of the key features of OTVR is not providing the customer with a list of here's all your vulnerabilities and the possible patches that are associated with them, but mapping those back to the actual asset, right? So that we can again prioritize those remediation steps and we actually patch that vulnerability.
And I might add, on the healthcare side, some of these tools. So the medical devices publish, MDS2, I guess, within the payload, within the packet, they have these MDS2 tables, if you will, that capture a lot of the details that which operating system, what type of security, things like that, and that is picked up by these passive tools that I think Robert talked about on the healthcare side as well, and then that is one reference on the best, known information around security for, on some of these devices. It's reverse engineered. So just wanted to add that data for healthcare.
So if I can add, we are integrated with Medigate and are bringing our entire biomed devices into the platform. We are able to detect and determine the model and type of each one of our biomed devices. However, when it comes to determining the patch level on each one of them from a passive scan, that has been proven to us to be impossible. So I'm trying to understand how that's performed.
On the OT devices, and when I say OT devices, right, I'm speaking specifically around drives and motors and PLCs and that sort of thing. Typically, they'll correlate that patch management, that patch level to the version of firmware that's currently installed on that device, and that's how they correlate those vulnerabilities that exist, right, and being able to match those up. It is a fairly shallow, I guess, pool, if you will, of those folks that actually provide that patch correlation, meaning, if I have, this version of firmware that exists on this controller, here's a list of available patches and, links to those. I think FoxGuard is one that they're starting to build integration into ServiceNow. I think obviously that's growing because that's from the utilities perspective, right? That's something that needs to be managed quite diligently, right? I think they have a 30-day window between the time a patch is released and they remediate that patch or come up with a remediation plan. So it's a very short window of time. So a lot of coordination efforts need to go to from the enterprise level to actually address those.
Yeah, we can see the patches that should be applied to each device, but we don't know what the patch level of each device is. And that gap is what vulnerability means, and that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think on the healthcare side, Andres, I think that remains that's why I talked a little bit about the complexity, right? I think it's a journey to protect these devices. I mean, you're getting some amount of data on current state from those NDS2, information that is published by these devices. But, once an action is taken, how do you keep track of, okay, I patched this, now is that being reflected in the end state of that device? Are they net new? I think that's a journey that we are on to try to help solve and make better. And we'll, continue to partner with folks like you to see how maybe outside of what Medigate does, can ServiceNow start building a map of, all the activities and patches that have been applied and the current state. That's something we can discuss, Andres.
Thanks.
So, sorry, since
You
we're
bet.
talking about healthcare, I'm just curious. This was the question that was, I think, partially answered. Your device discovery is really outside ServiceNow, and you mentioned in the notes that CMMS is not doing the discovery. Is there any reason why your slide does not show the ITOM discovery for this task? Did you really focus on external tools to collect device information? Or do you use ITOM discovery in some sense, but not in this particular use case?
Yeah, so maybe I can chime in there. So from a discovery perspective, medical devices have to be discovered in a very sort of special way. So a lot of our typical discovery tools, unfortunately, are not going to be able to perform that type of discovery. So technologies like Medigate, they actually do sort of deep packet inspection. So instead of reaching directly to the device, which that would set off all kinds of security alarms, and it also resides on different networks, it's actually monitoring the traffic, and based off of what Medigate's technology knows from the deep packet inspection it's performing, it knows what device that is, it knows certain details, it knows the anticipated behavior, and all of those different pieces. So that's why we're really reliant on and do depend on those medical device specific discovery tools in order to be able to perform that. Our typical, discovery, or even ServiceNow's discovery, in that case, is not going to be able to discover those medical devices in a way that really needs to be done for that solution.
Thank you. And also in this space, have you ever encountered Odor as a vendor or worked with ORDR?
Yeah,
you also
absolutely. Yes, we definitely integrate.
How do they
Odor.
compare to Medigate?
I don't know that I can speak to the specificity of the technology, but I can say that Medigate, we are was sort of one of the initial technologies that we strategically partnered with, and Medigate explicitly worked with us on building their integration directly with ServiceNow. So I can't speak to the technology itself, but I can say in terms of partnership and integration, we worked extremely close together in terms of what we're building out for clinical device management.
Yeah, and I might add to Jason what you're saying. I think Medigate, Order, they've been doing this discovery and cybersecurity space for a few years now. I think Mayo Clinic uses Order, and they've been using it successfully. So I think our approach is, we'll support all of these tools, and the customers decide what works best for them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Hey, John, I can add it a little bit if you want.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so we use a product called Assembly, and we have Ixia taps at the edge that captures that data and puts it into Assembly, right? And then we have integration points with Assembly in. So because to your point, you can't just interrogate these devices. You may take a critical medical device offline through an interrogation process.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, just a simple ping can bring a device down, right? We've seen that happen. So yeah, totally.
So, anyway, that's our experience for it. That's the tool we're currently using.
Yeah, there's actually half a dozen tools, that do similar things, right? So it's really up to you and your preference. Go ahead. Was there another question or comment?
Yeah, actually comment. This is Jeff Aldrich from Excel Energy. And one of our tricks about getting into our OT environment is they already have some tools that are doing some of these things. So if we were to add ITOM discovery, and now we're double, potentially duplicating some of the effort that's already going on, wasting time and traffic. And so, we're looking at how do we incorporate some of the things that they may already be doing to achieve the outcome that we're trying to get to, which is a comprehensive picture of what's going on in that environment. So It
Yeah,
may
I
not,
think-
it's a combination of things you might want to do to get to where you're going.
Right.
100%. Jeff,
Exactly.
we see that with all the OT customers as well, right? And I don't have a single OT customer that has just one point of ingest for the CMDB from an OT perspective, right? It'd be great if we could just deploy a Dragos at every single facility and only have Rockwell PLCs, but that's just not reality, right? We're going to have different environments and different networks and different technologies and that sort of thing. But we tend to go the direction of leveraging the best of any and all discovery possibilities, right? And I mentioned the ACC as one, so we can get a very level landscape of the entire environment, right? With without being intrusive, right? And running those active scans.
So I'll echo a question I put in the chat, but I mean, we have Industrial Defender, we also have Dragos in some cases. We have a few other things. I'm wondering, and this could come offline, but is there a list of what ServiceNow has currently already set up integrations with to make this easier versus things we have to go do and pull that data in manually and go through reconciliation processes, other such things?
Oh, for sure.
It'd be useful to know that.
Oh, for sure. Actually, after my last slide, I'll post in the chat a link to our current list of Service Graph connectors that are integrations that are available. And all those that you just mentioned are on that list. So if you want to go to the next slide, get it. Just to address what we're doing and how we're doing it within the OT landscape and the OTM product itself. These are not, I want to point out, these are not, obviously new solutions, right? But one thing that we have discovered is our traditional IT-based, solutions, because of, what we see in OT and the challenges and the network types and the, segmented networks and, priority on the devices and that sort of thing. We couldn't shoehorn our existing, IT-based solutions within the OT environment, industrial or utility, right? There's a lot of different, controls around the severity and the security and that sort of thing. So what we've done is we've purpose-built solutions around visibility, service management, and vulnerability response based on their IT equivalent to address the that OT, we like to say industrial landscape, whether it be manufacturing, utilities, oil and gas, that sort of thing. We pay a little bit more attention and a little bit more focus on the visibility component because obviously those networks and those processes are built much different, right? And we need to take a special care in terms of how we contextualize those devices, right? But once we do, again, the intent is to leverage the same policies that we've done so well in IT on the OT side of the house, right? We don't have a dedicated SOC team just for a plant environment, right? Or we don't have a dedicated IT team just to handle IT remediations on the plant floor, right? But they need that context. So these are, again, solution SKUs around OT visibility, OT service management, and OT vulnerability response. If we take a look at the next one, this is kind of a very high-level architecture of what that landscape looks like. Surjit, if you mind to go to the next one there. No different than the medical devices, right? We do leverage heavy on the integrations for some of the partners. This is just a short list. I'll include our more contextual list at the end of the meeting here. But these are pre-built connectors that are these partners have built to scan those devices and those networks safely. And they obviously populate not only the CMDB, they give us some context around the equipment model itself and where these devices live and play and the responsibilities and dependencies are within the plant floor. But they also give us an indication of the vulnerabilities that exist within those devices as well. And that's part of that OT visibility offering and that SKU. Now, once we have that context, right, now we can start taking advantage of that context around how do we respond, be at least proactive to or reactive to those security incidents, and how we manage OT incident and change. When we say OT incident, that could be any sort of incident within the plant, where it could be at a device level, right? I have a fault light on a specific component, or it can be at an operational level. I have a belt break. I had my pump blow up, my tank got too full, those sort of things. But how we take those same ITIL processes and provide that thinking and that playbook remediation steps and processes to a landscape where it really doesn't exist, right? Again, these are all paper records. They're all manually, they're a 3-ring binder, whiteboards and that sort of thing. But I think that wraps it up. I'll take it back to Surjit if there's any questions, and I'll post that link to the full list of service graph connectors that we have available for OT.
All right, I was on mute there. any questions that, I know we had some good exchange around the challenges of collecting data on these connected devices, right? And making sure that security updates are reflecting the current state. We got that one. I think ITOM and some of these passive discovery capabilities, I think, the comment there might be, you've got to, like we said, you got to have all of the above and build the best known enterprise asset management system out there, current state, so that you can manage the devices. That came up as well. Anything else that we missed, John, in the last minute or two we could cover for the team?
I think we're pretty good, unless anybody wants to come off mute, anything that wasn't asked in the questions. Okay, I can take the last minute and share a little bit about what we're doing next week if there's no more questions. And Surjit, would you guys be able to provide all that material today that you guys, okay, so I'll make sure I put that on the community.
I'll send it to you and you can put it on.
Awesome. Thank you guys very much. That was really informative. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'll just cover this briefly in our last minute. So for our next meeting, we're going to have a special guest speaker that's an author. And what we're going to talk about, we've had a lot of conversations around value stream mapping the last couple of years. And we're going to go ahead and, especially with the new part where ServiceNow has value stream management in there now. For those who don't know, a lot of you don't know about it yet. It's on the store and you could just add that to your base models. So what we're going to talk about is value stream mapping. So the actual art of creating a value stream. And Mike Osterling's going to speak about that. So he's one of the authors of the value stream mapping book. It's what we use here. It's kind of the Bible. What a lot of us use is the Bible for value stream mapping. So it's going to be great to have him on, but also we're going to have Mark on to talk about what the ServiceNow plan is for doing value stream management once the map's done. So those two are a lot of synergies, and a lot of times you'll catch somebody talking about one or the other, but to have somebody talk about them both in the same meeting is what our real goal is, so that we can see end to end. We can think about tie-ins to CSDM, like we talk about a lot on here. So I'm really looking forward to this one, and that'll be on our August 3rd meeting. So we'll send out some invites to that so that you have them. Okay, one last call for questions on the IoT stuff, or any questions on the agenda? All right, thank you very much, everybody. We'll talk to you in a few weeks. Bye-bye.
Thank you, bye-bye.
Thanks, folks.